Hi, I'm Surili.
Hi, I'm Seema.
Today we're joined by Brady Seals. Brady is a manager in RMI's carbon-free buildings program, where she works at the junction of air quality, buildings, and human health. She engages stakeholders in a rapidly transitioning to clean energy solutions that deliver environmental, health, and economic benefits. Welcome, Brady.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So for those of you who don't know, Brady is a little bit of a superstar, a celebrity. She recently appeared on the Samantha Bee show to talk about electrification. Can you tell us a little bit about what electrification is and how it relates to our health?
Absolutely. So I work on building electrification, and really what that boils down to is electrifying the couple of appliances in our homes. So our furnaces, our hot water heaters, our stoves, and transitioning from fossil fuels to electric appliances. And so I was on the Samantha Bee show because we all like to talk about the gas stove and what are some of the great alternatives and electric alternatives. I think, Seema, you may have an induction stove in your background there. And really, I think the stove is an entry point to making electrification of buildings, our homes, a kitchen table issue.
I love that.
Fascinating.
Absolutely. So what does that mean at an individual level, at a household level? How does electrification across the board affect families and their health, but also what kind of roles do you see government or global players playing in electrifying more buildings?
Well, we know from a climate perspective that we have to get rid of fossil fuels. And I was actually shocked to learn that about 70 million buildings still burn fossil fuels. So these are the places that we live, the places that we work and go to school. And so at the individual level, it means transitioning those 70 million buildings to electric alternatives for climate, but increasingly for health. And why is because, I think that the big one is air pollution. Fossil fuels are a huge contributor to air pollution. And right now, air pollution is the greatest environmental risk factor for early death. 100 to 200,000 people dying early because of exposure to air pollution. And half of that, at least, is from fossil fuels. And I find that very exciting because what that means is that a lot of this air pollution is preventable. So we have some solutions, and so we have the technology, which are things like heat pumps, which use electricity to heat your home, but also to cool your home. And that's another key thing for health, because along with cutting down from the air pollution that we breathe indoors, like from your gas stove, and outdoors from your furnace venting into your neighborhood, these heat pumps, as they can provide heat in the winter, but they can also provide cooling, which we know is becoming a huge health issue as the globe is warming and many people don't have access to cooling. So we're starting to see that there's a lot of intersections, and then there's a big safety concern with fossil fuel infrastructure. Gas, for example, is mostly methane, and it just wants to leak. And so it leaks and it can cause explosions. So we're trying to bring together some of the health co-benefits for electrifying our homes and our commercial buildings.
Wonderful. Thinking about the health implications and, the air that we breathe, can you speak a little bit to how our indoor air quality might be impacted by gas appliances?
Yes, so we spend about 90% of our time indoors. This was even pre-pandemic, so maybe that number is a bit higher now. One statistic that I love is that we spend more time in our buildings than some whales spend underwater. So whales are coming up for air more often than we leave our buildings. And it's ironic because our indoor air is not regulated. A lot of the appliances that cause elevated levels of pollutants aren't really regulated either. And so some of our exposure is greatest at home. Even when you go to the EPA website, they'll say indoor air quality is 2 to 5 and sometimes 100 times worse than outdoor air quality. So when we look at the sources, a big one is the gas stove. Gas stoves have really high levels of nitrogen dioxide, which is an invisible odorless gas. And some of the health issues we see there is a lot of respiratory impacts and asthma. There was one meta-analysis that looked at all the research, and they actually found that kids who live in a home with a gas stove have a 42% increased risk of asthma than kids who live in a home with an electric stove. My mind was blown when I read that. It's so common, and we don't often think of the device that we are cooking on every day as a source of that pollution. But the reality is it is, and part of the problem is a lot of these pollutants are invisible.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? How easy is it to switch out your gas stove to an electric stove? You know, I think of my own children, and you know, we do have allergies and asthma in our house, and we do have a gas stove. So, you know, I'm wondering, what would it take to make that switch?
It's a really good question. So you're not alone. About 35% of American households have gas stoves. And in some places like California, New York, I think even DC, that number is closer to 70%. And so it's a common issue. And I would say there's really 3 stages. The first is if you do have a gas stove, there are things you can do right away. Like if you have a range hood, using it. Many people don't use it because they, you know, it's either just loud or they don't think they need it. But using your range hood, opening up a window if you don't have one, is a good first step. And if you do use a range hood, studies show that actually cooking on the back burners removes a lot more pollutants because most hoods don't extend over the front. The second stage is a sort of a lower cost option, which is to try a plug-in induction stove. So you can get one online. I think I got one for $70, and induction works by using magnets. And so you can put your pan, as long as a magnet sticks to the bottom of your pot or pan, it will work. And you can try out cooking with magnets. And then the third is to fully switch over. And this is the most challenging. One, because induction stoves, they're 2 to 3 times more efficient than gas. They have, you know, none of these combustion pollutants, but they're not popular here. They're less than 2% of the market share, whereas in Europe, Hong Kong, other places, they're really popular. And so a lot of people who have been, for example, a lot of my family and friends have been trying to get induction stoves now because for the health reasons, and the waiting list and the availability and the cost is still too high. So you asked before of what policymakers should be doing and can be doing. And I think one thing is we need more incentives to get electric and induction stoves into homes. This is a huge health equity issue. We know the smaller the home, the more people in the home, the higher the exposure concentration can be. So we should be prioritizing getting gas out of public and affordable housing and putting in these electric alternatives. What do you do for renters who can't make that decision? And I think a big one is the EPA to have an Energy Star rating because of all the great energy savings of induction. And once we have these Energy Star, it'll be much easier for Home Depots of the world to carry these. If you go into your local Home Depot or Lowe's right now, you may not even see an induction stove, which is what I found in Boulder. So we need more incentives. We need to make these great technologies accessible and affordable.
I love that. I love that you talked about equity, because oftentimes it does come down to the individual choice, and sometimes choice is between, you know, putting food on the table versus, or medication versus upgrading appliances, and that could be very expensive. And also upgrading cookware, right? So we're talking induction. I moved into this house and had an induction stove, and I had to immediately replace my cookware, which was not cost effective, but certainly see the benefits for health. And I was fortunate enough to be able to make that shift. So thank you for talking about policy solutions that can scale up opportunities. You touched on indoor air quality, and that is really, really important because our health, especially the health of children or those who have respiratory issues. I also see a connection to COVID. One connection that you explain very clearly is because of COVID, a lot of us are staying home more often. Can you talk about other connections about respiratory health that, and COVID that you're seeing in the electrification for making a case for why we should move to electrification in the homes and in buildings?
Absolutely. So we are seeing that one of the issues when you burn fossil fuels is that there's this whole potpourri of different pollutants that are coming out. And when you start to segregate out those pollutants, we have some of the bad ones like the particulate matter, PM 2.5, that small particles that can penetrate deep into the lungs and even the bloodstream. And then there's this other one, which I kind of call like, it's the forgotten pollutant for a lot of, I think, health work, especially when it relates to indoor air quality, which is nitrogen dioxide. One of the reasons is because it's hard to measure. It's invisible, it's a gas, it's a toxic gas, but it's sort of a triple threat because we know, and the EPA has says that short-term exposure to this nitrogen dioxide can cause asthma attacks, and it likely contributes to the development of asthma. So there's very strong respiratory health, but implications. But then outdoors, nitrogen dioxide, it also turns into particulate matter, and it also turns into ozone, which of course has other health impacts. So it's sort of this triple threat pollutant that's coming from gas when we burn it. And there was a study that was done during COVID, and they found really strong linkages between exposure to nitrogen dioxide. We often think of this as a traffic pollutant from the car tailpipe. A lot of those same pollutants that come from the car tailpipe also come from unvented gas burning, such as in a stove or an unvented heater. So nitrogen dioxide has actually shown to have a strong correlation with COVID-19. And I think that as we learn more, we'll see that when you break down these pollutants, there are these correlations, and then it's going to be trying to figure out where can we reduce everywhere we can. And I think that's sort of, it's this whack-a-mole that we talk about a lot, but one of the things I get excited about buildings is that we have solutions, we have the technology. We know that when you replace a gas stove with an electric stove, you have zero nitrogen dioxide. And so I think that this linkage between nitrogen dioxide or NO2 with COVID is one thing that has come out of the research that we found very interesting. And then the second one that I'll just touch on briefly is that ventilation is an unsung hero of everything. And as you both well know, of reducing spread of diseases, of helping us be healthier at schools. And I think that we're seeing that, electric options paired with good ventilation is where we're going to see some of the strongest health benefits, including with reducing the transmission of COVID. So our buildings can work for us or against us. And unfortunately, today, most of our buildings are working against us.
So much to unpack there.
I think so. I do have one follow-up question about what you just said, and there's so many visuals that you just demonstrated that they're going to sit with me for a while. I wonder if you were to play devil's advocate, what would you say are the downsides of electrification? We've heard all the benefits, but I'd love to hear about what are some of the negatives.
Sure. So I would say at the individual level, the top negatives right now are cost, accessibility, and just how hard it is to do it. Let's say you're really motivated and you have the means to electrify. It's sometimes hard to find a contractor to come in and install a heat pump. It's new still, and I think we are experiencing some of the learning curves. And so if you want to get an induction stove, like some of my friends, you may be waiting 3 months, and then it shows up and you find out that you have to change out your electrical, your socket isn't the right kind. And so it's not easy for people to do at the household level yet. That's one. And then I think at the macro level, from just electrification as a whole, so buildings are responsible for 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So we know we need to electrify them. And I said before, it's 70 million buildings who are burning gas. So we want to see all those go onto the grid. And one thing that I think for health and resilience and everything else is that we need to make sure that we have enough power that's affordable for people. Again, this sort of climate justice, health equity issues, and that too, we have enough storage and capacity. So when we see these extreme weather events, what happened in Louisiana, what happened in Texas, that we're making sure that we're not leaving people in the dark without a way to, light their homes and heat their homes, et cetera. And so I think this is where we know what needs to happen. We know on the grid where it needs to be going. And it's going to take investments. It's going to take political will to make sure that we have this renewable energy capacity, but also storage, so that we are supplying households for, the best of times, but also the worst of times.
So much information. It's just been such a fascinating conversation, and clearly you have a great passion for this work. I'd love to learn a little bit about how you got on your journey. How did you get into this space, and tell us how you ended up being a team member at RMI.
It's a great question. So I'm a cook stover at heart. I started my career working internationally on clean cook stoves. So places where half the world is still cooking with wood and charcoal. And we were promoting cleaner alternatives. And so it was really at this intersection where I saw that energy, it's not just energy, it's so many things. It's health, it's women's issues, it's children's issues. So it was really eye-opening for me how something so simple of a clean cook stove could be very transformative when done right, and also how challenging it was. I had worked in 19 different countries, and I know the whole clean cooking movement, it has been very hard to get clean solutions, into the hands of people who need it the most in a way that's affordable and accessible. Same issues that we're dealing with here. So I really worked in both humanitarian settings. I graduated from college early and got this job at a nonprofit. And my first trip was to Ethiopia, to the Somali refugee camps. And it just was an experience that in my young self really brought me to my knees, because I remember going into these tent cities, these refugee camps, which were of course supposed to be temporary. And I was meeting people who were older than me that were born in that camp. And you saw what will happen when we get to this crisis? What will happen when there's no more firewood, when there's no water, when you can't? And it really, the energy piece of it, of how much people were struggling to cook, how women were exposed to violence while going out to get firewood, because that became, the firewood was life, and it became a big tension point for the local community. And so that to me was a very intense experience. And I think it grounded me in wanting to work on energy, specifically household energy. And so my career since then, on the 11 years, has been trying to get to that point and sort of seeing this is worst case scenario. What can we do to prevent this from happening when we have these scarce resources and we're fighting over these scarce resources, and how much of this is borne by women and children. So that was my first foray into this. And I worked in nonprofits, and I worked with my husband in a startup. We worked for corporations as a consultant. And then I applied for RMI. I was wanting to take a break from cook stoves and work on electrification. And of course, here I am still working on stoves, gas stoves. I think I can never get away from it. But one thing I want to share about RMI is that I did not get my first job at RMI. I applied for RMI's global work, doing a lot of the same work I was doing before, and mini grids and microgrids, and trying to get different countries in Africa connected. I didn't get that job, and they said, why don't you think about buildings? Why don't you think about our buildings program? And at the time, I really wasn't sure how I could connect to that or what that would look like. But I took a chance and joined the buildings team. And I learned myself about all these co-benefits. I feel so lucky to work at a climate nonprofit that's focused on the clean energy transition at RMI and be able to work on co-benefits and to learn about how so much of my previous work and what I saw in Ethiopia or Haiti and other places is playing out here in similar ways. And so I'm really excited to get to work with households, with folks to make sure that we are having the cleanest energy possible for our climate and also for our health.
What a wonderful journey. If you had one small piece of advice for others who are passionate about climate work, what might it be?
I think I'm ever the optimist. I would say we have solutions. We need passionate people to just help us get the funding and the political will directed at the places where we know it can benefit the most. So my advice would be join us, because that's what we really need. We have the solutions, but we need more people helping to, as you guys say here, raise your voice. I mean, I feel like you need J-Lo and her Let's Get Loud song to come in here and sponsor this, but lend your voice and help us direct political will and funding to these places where we have the solutions and we know we can make the impact.
I love that so much. That advice is fantastic and exactly what we need in this movement. And let's stop calling it a crisis, and let's focus on the positivity. And I absolutely love your optimism, Brady. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel a lot smarter after talking to you, and I feel a lot more equipped with the other side of climate and health, which is, solutions that are rooted in what happens at our kitchen table, our kitchen stove, in our homes. And so that means the world for us to be able to join you at our kitchen table to talk about it. And thank you to the listeners. Thank you so much for following us. Check out our blog. We're gonna funnel a ton of information and links that talk about Brady's work and even her interview with Samantha Bee. So check it out.
We'd love to hear from you. Leave us a message. Tell us what you'd love to learn more about. And until next time, let's all make some noise for climate. Thank you.
Thank you.